Claro, segue o roteiro completo em inglês, mantendo o som dramático e narrativo do original. Baseado no arquivo enviado, Mariana Castro was 32 years old and lived a quiet life on the outskirts of the city. She worked at a small publishing house, correcting other people's texts, and lived in a 2-bedroom apartment she had been paying for on her own for 3 years. 3 years earlier, her life had been different. 3 years earlier, she was going to marry Diego Lascano. Diego came from a wealthy family, though not the kind of wealth that was shown off. His father owned a chain of car dealerships in the northern part of the country, and Diego, according to him, was building his own path, far from his father's shadow. Mariana had liked that about him, a man who did not need his father's last name to feel like someone. They met at a mutual friend's wedding. They danced awkwardly, laughed at how awkwardly they danced, and 2 years later, they were engaged. Mariana left her job at a large agency to help him build a real estate project he claimed to be working on. She put in her savings, she put in her time. She put her name down as a guarantor on a loan that, according to him, was only a formality. 3 months before the wedding, Diego disappeared for 2 weeks without explanation. When he came back, he said he needed time. A month later, Mariana discovered that he had spent that time with Valentina Roig, the daughter of a businessman who did have the kind of money people showed off. There was no big scene, no shouting in the street. Diego simply told her that things with Valentina were serious, that he was sorry, and that he hoped someday she would understand. Mariana understood only one thing. She had put 3 years of her life into someone who replaced her the way someone trades in a used car for a newer model. The loan stayed in her name. Diego never paid his part. The first months after the breakup were, in Mariana's words, like walking on a tilted floor. She moved into a smaller apartment, in a less comfortable neighbourhood, and let go of several mutual friendships because it was easier not to have to explain, over and over again, why there was no longer a wedding, why Diego was no longer there. Her mother, who had never fully trusted him, repeated, "I told you so," on every call. Her younger sister, on the other hand, was the only one who stayed close without judging her. The loan was the hardest part. Every month when the statement arrived, Mariana felt anger toward Diego for leaving her with the debt, and shame toward herself for having signed without fully understanding what she was signing. It took her 2 years to pay it off completely, working during the day at the publishing house and at night doing freelance proofreading. She told almost no one. It felt like a failure too intimate to share. But something changed, almost without her noticing. During the process of understanding that loan clause by clause, she began researching financial law, guarantors, and how shared loans are structured in a relationship. What started as self-defense ended up becoming something close to a calling. Until one Tuesday in October, 3 years after that 15-minute conversation that changed her life, an envelope arrived at her apartment. Thick paper, gold embossed letters. Diego Lascano and Valentina Roig are pleased to invite you to celebrate their union. Mariana stared at the envelope for a long time before opening it all the way. She did not understand why they were inviting her. She did not understand why Diego, after 3 years of total silence, suddenly wanted to see her there, seated among his guests, watching him marry the woman he had left her for. She called her sister that same night. "Do you think I should go?" she asked. "I think you should first ask yourself why they invited you," her sister replied, "because people like Diego never do anything without a reason." That question kept spinning in Mariana's mind for several days. What Mariana did not know was that the invitation was not a mistake. It was a plan, and she was a necessary piece in that plan. Valentina Roig was 26 years old, had an Instagram account with 80,000 followers, and an almost physical need to be seen winning. She'd grown up in a house where money was never a topic of conversation because money was never a problem. She met Diego at an event hosted by her father's company, where he introduced himself as an independent real estate entrepreneur, carefully leaving out the fact that this enterprise had been sustained, in large part, by the savings and guarantee of his ex-fiancée. To Valentina, Diego seemed interesting precisely because of that. He looked like a man who had made himself. They started dating shortly afterward, and her father began to see him not only as his daughter's boyfriend, but as a possible piece inside the family business. From the day Diego told her, laughing, the story of the ex who got stuck paying a loan that wasn't even for her, Valentina kept that story like a trophy. She repeated it at gatherings, presenting herself as the smart woman who would never make that mistake. When she began planning the wedding, she did not just want to get married, she wanted a stage. And on that stage, she needed contrast. She needed someone to be there, dressed simply, seated at a table in the back, so that the 200 guests could look at Valentina in her hand-embroidered dress and think, without anyone saying it out loud, "Look how far he has come. Look at what he left behind." "Let's invite Mariana," she told Diego one night, as if the idea had just casually occurred to her. That way, we close that chapter, like civilized people. Diego hesitated for a second. Something in his stomach told him it was a bad idea. But saying no to Valentina had never come without a cost, especially in recent months, when her father had begun speaking openly about seeing what responsibilities Diego could take on inside the company once the family was formally united. So he said yes. What neither of them included in the plan was that Mariana, during those 3 years of silence, had not remained still. After the breakup, Mariana did something that surprised even her own family. There were months of real sinking, nights when she wondered what she had done wrong. But at some point, she began channeling that anger into something different. She did not stay waiting for an apology that would never come. She took the texts she corrected for others and began writing her own. First, they were articles for small magazines about subjects she knew closely. How to divide expenses in a relationship, what to ask before signing a joint loan, how to recognize when a loan described as just a formality actually leaves you legally exposed. Then came a weekly column about relationships and money, written with an honesty that surprised her first readers. The column began to circulate. A medium-sized publisher contacted her after seeing that one of her articles had been shared more than 10,000 times in a week. 18 months of work later, between nights of writing and entire weekends in front of the computer, Mariana published a book, The Loan No One Tells You About. It was a mix of personal memoir and practical guide about shared debts, guarantees, and how to protect yourself legally and financially in a relationship. The book was not an instant success. It was a slow success, the kind built through recommendations, through people giving it to a friend who was going through something similar. By the time the golden invitation arrived, Mariana's book had spent 31 weeks on a non-fiction bestseller list, and she had given 2 university talks about financial education and relationships. Diego knew nothing about this. He had never searched Mariana's name online again. Neither had Valentina. To them, Mariana was still the girl from the small publishing house, the living proof that Diego had done well by leaving in search of something better. Mariana, however, did know something they did not know she knew. She knew exactly how that loan had been structured, because she had studied it clause by clause for months. She knew exactly what conditions Diego had signed without fully reading, pressured by the bank's deadlines and the urgency of closing the deal before the wedding that never happened. And she knew because a source close to the Roig family had accidentally mentioned it during a work dinner, that Valentina's father was financing much of the wedding, and that the money was tied to very specific conditions about Diego's professional future inside the family company, a regional directorship that depended largely on the Roig family fully trusting their new son-in-law. When Mariana opened the golden envelope, she did not feel only pain. For the first time in 3 years, she felt curiosity. A cold, almost professional curiosity about what kind of spectacle Diego and Valentina had built, and what place they had reserved for her inside that spectacle. She decided to go, but not the way they expected her to, and what she carried with her that night was not a dress meant to impress. It was something far more dangerous for Diego and Valentina, the truth, organised, with dates and evidence. Over the next 2 weeks, Mariana did something she had not expected to do. She began preparing, as if that wedding were more of a work presentation than a party. She called her lawyer, a friend from college who had helped her with the loan contract, and asked her to review the original documents one more time. She wanted to be sure of every date, every clause. "Are you going to talk about this at the wedding?" her lawyer asked, almost amused. "I don't know if I'm going to talk about anything," Mariana answered. "But if I have to, I don't want to get a single detail wrong." She also told her editor, who took it very seriously. "If something happens at that wedding, this could be very good or very bad for the book," she said. "Don't say anything you can't support with evidence." That sentence stayed engraved in her mind over the following days. The night before the wedding, she could not sleep well. She mentally reviewed the dates of the loan, the name of the bank, the joint guarantee clause. "Are you nervous?" her sister asked over the phone. "A little, but not about seeing them together. I'm afraid of not saying the right thing, if the moment comes to say something." "You'll know what to say," her sister told her. "You always do. Before they just didn't let you speak." What Mariana did not imagine was that same night, Valentina was having a very different conversation with her father, a conversation that would end up being decisive for everything that would happen the next day. Ricardo Roig had built his company from scratch, and that had made him extremely careful with anyone who approached his daughter with unclear intentions. He liked Diego, but liking someone and trusting someone completely were, for Ricardo, two different categories. The night before the wedding, he called Valentina into his study. "I want to talk to you about something before tomorrow, about Diego and the regional directorship." "Dad, we've already talked about this. Diego's ready." "Diego has not shown anything yet, beyond being charming at family dinners," Ricardo replied. "Before I put my name behind his, I need to see how he behaves under pressure. Not in a board meeting. In real life." Valentina did not understand what her father meant, but he left her with a sentence she would not forget. "Tomorrow's wedding is not just a party, daughter. It is the final test before I sign anything, and I'll be watching everything." What she did not know was that, days earlier, Ricardo had heard a casual comment from a business associate invited to the wedding about Diego's ex, the one who wrote that finance book everyone is talking about. Out of professional curiosity, Ricardo had done his own research and discovered that Mariana was not at all the defeated woman Diego described in his dinner table stories. Ricardo decided to keep that information to himself. He wanted to see, with his own eyes, how Diego would react if things did not go exactly as planned. The next day, as the guests arrived at the estate amid laughter and camera flashes, no one at that party knew that three different stories were about to collide at the same time. The story of a woman who arrived ready to no longer stay silent. The story of a father silently evaluating everything. And the story of a couple who believed they had everything under control. The wedding took place at an estate on the outskirts of the city, the kind that rents out enormous gardens and hangs lights between the trees so everything looks like it came out of a magazine. 200 guests, a 12-piece orchestra, a wedding dress that, people later said, had cost more than Mariana's apartment. Mariana arrived alone, wearing the navy blue tailored suit she had finally chosen. Simple, impeccable. Nothing that shouted, "Look at me," but nothing that apologized for being there either. When she got out of the car, she felt a knot in her stomach, the same one she used to feel years earlier before turning in an important text at her old job. Nerves, yes, but not paralyzing fear. She took a deep breath and walked in. As Valentina had planned, they seated her at a table in the back, near the kitchen, far from the official photographer's cameras. Some guests recognized her and murmured among themselves. One of Diego's cousins, Carolina, came over to ask her, with a smile that did not reach her eyes, how she was, what had become of her life, after everything that happened. "I'm doing well," Mariana answered calmly. "The truth is, things have actually gone surprisingly well for me." Carolina smiled like someone who did not believe a word, and went back to her table, where she could be seen retelling it with laughter, as if it were the joke of the night. The ceremony moved forward without interruption. The vows, the kiss. Ricardo Roig watched everything from the front row, with a calm expression that revealed nothing of what he was thinking. From time to time, his eyes drifted toward the table in the back, toward that woman who remained perfectly upright in the middle of an environment designed, in part, to make her feel small. During the reception came the moment Valentina had been waiting for, since she created the guest list. The toast. She took the microphone herself, something unusual, but Valentina never let someone else tell her story. She talked about how Diego had found in her a woman who understood his true worth, unlike other people from his past. And then, glancing casually toward the table in the back, she added, "And I especially want to thank the people who taught us, through their example, what we do not want to become. Sometimes the universe sends us the wrong person, only so we can recognize the right one when they arrive." A nervous laugh moved through some tables. Diego, glass in hand, said nothing. He did not stop her. He smiled, uncomfortable, like someone who knew something was wrong but preferred not to make waves at his own wedding. Mariana felt heat rise up her neck, But she did not lower her gaze. She looked directly at Valentina without blinking, until Valentina herself was the first to look away. What Valentina did not expect was that, once her speech ended, someone would hand the microphone back to Mariana. And that Mariana this time would decide not to stay silent. It was Diego's best man, Joaquin, a distant cousin who had never fully agreed with the way Diego's relationship with Mariana had ended, who took the microphone after Valentina. Maybe it was one drink too many. Maybe it was a subtle way to make Diego uncomfortable. But Joaquin, half joking and half serious, said, "Well, since we're inviting the back table to participate in the thank yous, Mariana, don't you want to say something? After all, you knew Diego before all of us." There was silence. Valentina squeezed her glass so hard that her knuckles turned white. Diego searched for his father with his eyes, 2 tables away, as if asking for help without knowing what kind of help he needed. Mariana remained still for a second, weighing everything her lawyer and editor had told her in the days before. Don't say anything you can't support with evidence. She stood up, walked calmly to the front, and took the microphone Joaquin handed her. "Thank you," she said, looking first at Valentina, then at Diego, and finally at the 200 guests watching her in complete silence. "The truth is, I wasn't planning to speak tonight. But since that the example of what we don't want to become was mentioned, I think it's only fair to share something I learned over these 3 years since Diego and I ended." She paused. The entire room was absolutely silent. "I learned that when someone asks you to sign something just as a formality, you should always read it twice. I learned so much from that experience, in fact, that I ended up writing a book about it. Some of you may know it, The Loan No One Tells You About. It has spent 31 weeks on the non-fiction bestseller list." A murmur moved through the tables. Someone took out a phone and began recording discreetly. "I did not come here to ruin anyone's night," Mariana continued, her voice steady. "I came because I was invited, and I was curious to see in person the wedding that, as I understand it, Valentina's father is financing under the condition that Diego take over the regional directorship of the family company within 6 months. A condition that depends on this wedding happening exactly as planned, and on Diego proving himself to be someone who can be fully trusted." Diego turned pale. Valentina's father, sitting at the front table, stopped smiling for the first time all night and leaned slightly forward. Valentina opened her mouth to say something, but no sound came out. "So I propose a toast," Mariana said, lifting a glass a waiter had brought her minutes earlier, "to learning how to read the fine print, in loans and in people. Congratulations to you both." A silence fell that seemed to last an entire minute, a silence so dense you could hear the wind moving the hanging lights between the trees. Then someone at a faraway table, an older woman, whom no one later recognised as a relative from either side, began to clap, slowly, almost like a reflex. The applause spread, uncomfortable but real, table by table, while Valentina, her smile frozen into a grimace that no longer fooled anyone, begged Diego, with her eyes, to do something, anything, to say something that would fix the situation. Diego did nothing. And that night, what broke was not Mariana's plan, it was Valentina's. Minutes after the toast, Ricardo Roig stood up without saying a word and walked toward one of the side gardens, away from the lights and music. Diego, after hesitating, followed him. "Ricardo, I can explain," he began. "I don't need you to explain anything," Ricardo answered, without raising his voice. "I need to understand one thing. Is what that woman said true?" Diego stayed silent 1 second too long, which, for Ricardo, was already an answer in itself. "It's complicated," Diego finally said. "The loan was arranged during a difficult moment." "I didn't ask you how the loan was arranged," Ricardo interrupted. "I asked whether you left a person paying a debt alone, that was also yours, while you moved on with your life without looking back." Diego did not answer. He did not need to. "I'm going to tell you something, and I want you to understand it well," Ricardo continued. "I don't care as much about what happened 3 years ago. What I care about is what happened 10 minutes ago, in front of 200 people. You had the chance to stand up, to defend your wife, and you stayed seated, pale, waiting for the situation to resolve itself." "I didn't want to make things worse," Diego murmured. "You made things worse with your silence," Ricardo replied. "A man who cannot handle an uncomfortable situation at his own wedding is not a man I am going to put in charge of the regional direction of my company. That is not a punishment. It is information. Information I just received. And the condition for the regional directorship? Diego asked, his voice thin. We'll talk about that another time. Not in the garden of your wedding, Ricardo said, walking back toward the lights. But I'm not going to lie to you. What I saw today changed the way I think quite a bit. Mariana never heard directly what happened in that garden, but the consequences of that conversation would arrive, one after another, over the following months, like dominoes falling in silence. The video of Mariana's toast was uploaded to the internet that same early morning, first in private groups, then on public accounts that clipped it and added subtitles. Within a week, it had more than 6 million combined views. People in the comments called it the fine print toast, and the phrase began being used as a meme for any situation where someone discovers, late but still in time, a hidden condition in a contract. Sales of Mariana's book multiplied by 20 in less than a month. The publisher had to order an emergency print run of 50,000 copies, and even that was not enough to meet demand in the first 2 weeks. 3 television networks invited her to speak about finances in romantic relationships. Mariana accepted only one, and she used that interview to talk about how to protect financial rights inside a relationship, without mentioning Diego or Valentina's names even once. For Diego, things were very different. The conversation in the garden was only the beginning. Ricardo Roig began involving him less and less in company decisions. The regional directorship condition, which at one point had seemed almost automatic, became an evaluation without guarantees, and later silently became nothing at all. Valentina's father, furious over the public exposure of the family arrangement in front of 200 guests, many of them business partners, decided that a man who could not control even his own reception was not someone he would trust with the direction of his company. With the condition gone, much of Valentina's enthusiasm disappeared as well. She began distancing herself from a Diego who, without the promised position, suddenly seemed much less interesting to her. 6 months after the wedding, a rumour began circulating that they were no longer living together. No one officially confirmed it, but Valentina's social media posts, once full of couple photos, began showing her always alone, with captions about finding herself, phrases that, ironically, sounded like the kind of content Mariana herself had shared in her columns years earlier. Mariana, for her part, never publicly mentioned Diego or Valentina again. She did not need to. Her story had already done the work for her. 1 year later, she published a second book about how to rebuild yourself professionally and financially after a breakup. In the dedication, she wrote a single line, without naming anyone. For every person who was once invited to the table, in the back, and decided anyway to stand up. Sometimes we are invited to the wrong parties because people think we will be the shadow that makes someone else shine. But some people, silently, for years, instead of staying in the shadows, build their own light. And when they finally turn it on, there is no need to shout. All they need to do is stand up, take the microphone, and tell the truth. If this story made you think, tell us in the comments what you would have done in Mariana's place. And if you want more stories like this, you already know what to do. Subscribe, turn on the notification bell, and I'll see you in the next story.